Thank you for joining us today for our talk on oxalates. We are naturopathic physicians here at Prosper Natural Health, located in Port Townsend, Washington. And I'm joined by Dr. Rosalie de Lombaert, who's my team care doctor here. And I'm Dr. Molly Force, and I'm the clinical director here at Prosper. And we have patients who ask us lots of questions every month. And so we love to be able to share information about what's coming up clinically and what's really relevant, and look into the research and keep people up to date and fresh on all the new information, especially when it comes to natural medicine, because that is really our specialty. So we've recorded our talks online. Please feel free to check them out. You can go to our website at prospernaturalhealth.com and check out that education tab and see those recordings there. So today we're talking about oxalates. We're going to want to make sure that we understand why oxalates are formed in the body, and of course, which organ systems get affected by oxalates. And then we're going to really dive into the newest, latest research on oxalates and talk about natural supportive treatments that will help with the dissolution of these oxalates, which we know can cause these damaging stones in the body. So specifically, when we think of oxalates, we're most concerned about stones forming in the kidneys, but we find that oxalates go through the digestive tract as well. And oxalates kind of have this term as being an anti-nutrient, and there's a whole group of anti-nutrients. You might have heard of things like lectins and cruciferous veggies as well, that can become goitrogens that are called anti-nutrients as well. But oxalates are specifically found in plants, and we think about them being found in higher amounts in the leafy part of the plants rather than the stems. And we think about plants like spinach, beets, especially those beet greens once again. In tea, we think about finding them, and in rhubarb. And they're also found in certain nuts and grains and also in beans. Now, the problem with oxalates that we get into as humans is oxalates can bind calcium and some other minerals, and that can reduce the actual absorption of calcium into our bodies. And then those oxalates that are bound to that calcium can be excreted by the kidneys. But the problem is if there's excessive amounts, those can form stones and become these calcium oxalate stones that we are so familiar with. It's the #1 type of kidney stones found in people.
So, are oxalates problematic? The answer is yes, but only in susceptible populations. So, as Dr. Molly said, the oxalates can decrease calcium absorption and increase kidney stone formation, specifically the most common kind known as calcium oxalate stones. So, we'll look at the populations next, which need to be mindful of oxalates.
Now, with this increased risk of calcium oxalate stones, we see this in people who are having too high of urinary calcium levels. And this can be because many different reasons. One of the #1 reasons we see in our practice is not that they're taking a whole bunch of extra calcium, although that can be an issue, but it's often caused by the parathyroid glands. So that can be a cause of hypercalcemia. And we want to make sure we're doing our basic lab work every year, our annual lab work, which includes a urine analysis, which can help us kind of pick up on these things. Now, we also want to be making sure that our patients aren't having high amounts of oxalates in their urine, and there's testing for that. And so we know if you have too much oxalates coming through, obviously this can be caused by things like eating too much oxalates in our food and having them come through the urine. Now, that can be another reason why there's higher risk for stone formation. And then low citrate levels, and we're going to talk about that more here today. And when we have these lower citrate levels, it actually increases our risk of these calcium oxalate stones. And then uric acid that is too low in pH, too acidic. So that's another reason that the body may create more of these calcium oxalate stones.
So, who are the populations that should diminish dietary oxalates? We're thinking in particular about patients with current or past diagnoses of kidney stones of this variety, ones that have a strong family history, a genetic line of getting kidney stones. Those with severe osteoporosis or bone loss, especially given that oxalates can bind calcium. And then otherwise, some genetic conditions or diseases like primary hyperoxaluria, the rare disorder that causes the buildup of oxalates in kidneys. Of course, we're imagining a low to no oxalate diet in these patients. And then lastly, this is sort of a population we forget about, but those that are poor, those that have a difficult time hydrating well, right? And this, I think about my population who is like working outdoors and forgetting to drink water, because of course the water is there to flush out the kidneys. If it's not being flushed out, then we get a preponderance for kidney stone formation. So the other big piece here is that cutting out oxalates altogether is also problematic. This has to do with the fact that your oxalate-rich foods, which are vegetables, contain a high level of healthy compounds, whether it's fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, polyphenols. This is just a list of all the high oxalate foods. You see spinach on there, beets, sweet potato, Swiss chard, soy, okra, green tea. These are all like, anti-inflammatory foods, right? So it's not a recommendation we make just willy-nilly. I think omitting oxalate-rich foods can have a negative impact, which is why only certain populations do we recommend this intervention with. So something to notice here is, okay, if you are concerned about your oxalate load, you can mitigate the oxalates instead of removing the oxalate-rich foods, right? You see this graph on the right-hand side with the anti-nutrients found in plants. Oxalates can be prepared in a way that reduces, or oxalate-rich foods can be prepared in a way that reduces the oxalate load. So think about adding water, soaking, boiling, steaming, and also adding calcium, or as we'll see later, magnesium, as a way to mitigate the absorption of them. Things that will increase the oxalate load is sort of preparing these foods in fat, whether it's roasting or grilling or baking, these kinds of more high heat interventions. So remember that oxalates are there, these anti-nutrients are there in plants because plants don't have legs to move up and run away when there is something that's trying to eat them. So what they do instead is they try to put out constituents that for the foraging animals to eat less of them. So an example, if you've got aphids eating a plant leaf, it puts out antimicrobial constituents. If you've got your foraging mammals eating the leaves, it puts out these anti-nutrients to try to convince the animal, okay, well, things are not going well when I eat that plant. So ultimately, it's just kind of an amazing thing that happens in nature, but we definitely have to mitigate it. Like Dr. Molly said, selecting the part of the plant is helpful. Of course, the leaves, those are the ones foraged on the most. Spinach leaves, beet greens are much higher in oxalates than the stalks or even the roots are. So some other anti-nutrients that we're putting in here because it ends up being part of this conversation a bit. And we have patients who come in on lectin-free diets or phytate-free diets, right? So it's just part of the conversation. Today is mostly on oxalates though, but know in your research, you might run across these other anti-nutrients. Lectins are found in legumes, grains, nightshades. Phytates are found in legumes, especially soy, seeds, nuts, and unprocessed whole grains. This is why if you think back to how your grandma used to prepare grains, she would soak and sprout them. This was a way to get rid of the lectins and the phytates and the tannins. Tannins are the really astringent constituents, again, found in legumes, but especially in our tea, coffee, red wine, dark chocolate, berries, nuts, and grapes. The quick side note here is the most common cause or the most common source of tannins in the American diet is from coffee. And it's also the most common source of polyphenols, which are an amazing anti-inflammatory. So it's just, taking both of these into consideration. Lastly, the goitrogens are plant matter that contributes to goiters or masses in the thyroid, and these are found in your cruciferous veggies.
I love this reminder that these plant chemicals that come in to protect the plant also often will come in with all these really beneficial components that the plant is gifting us. So there's such a balance here when we think about that. So we really don't want to encourage our patients to just avoid, just because these might contain some amount of these quote unquote anti-nutrients in there. There's so much benefit to many of these. So we really want to pick and choose. And that's one of the reasons we love being able to make individualized recommendations for our patients. So when we're thinking about ways to assess oxalate concern for our patients, one of the most important tools that we have is basic urinalysis. And we want to also be able to check in on some blood work. So with the blood work specifically, we're trying to see on an annual basis, at least, so once a year, a comprehensive metabolic panel. And that's going to show us what our patient's serum blood calcium is. That's going to tell us about their parathyroid gland function. It's also going to tell us if they just have really high levels of calcium or low levels of calcium. And then we're also going to be able to see from that standard lab panel that we get yearly from our patients a vitamin D level. And because we know that there's such a direct relationship with calcium and vitamin D and oxalates, those are very important to assess. We also, when we're doing this urine analysis, sometimes we'll see on that urine analysis actual calcium oxalates coming out. And you can see this little example at the bottom of the page here. So when we're looking for crystal types, that's something that the lab will result out for us. And when we're seeing a patient who's frankly producing quite a bit of calcium oxalate in their urine sample, then we know that they already have this gravel or even stone creation of these calcium oxalate byproducts in their kidneys and up and in that urinary system. So we want to make sure we're really reducing that process and helping them clear that as much as possible. We can also send stones to be analyzed. Of course, that would be if they were passed. And of course, passing a kidney stone is very painful and often done in an emergency setting, an emergency room setting. And then when we are thinking about ways to assess the amount of oxalates that people are excreting, we're going to be collecting a 24-hour urine sample. So then we'll send our patients home with these big orange jugs so that they can collect their urine for 24 hours and then submit it to the lab to understand how much oxalates are coming through or how much calcium in combination with that is coming through as well. The other piece we're often looking at is imaging. And so that would be either X-ray, ultrasound, or kidney CT, kidney and urinary system and bladder CT. So we like to make sure that if we're concerned about stones, that that's being assessed because that can cause a medical emergency for people. We want to remind you all, because of that connection with vitamin D, we did an entire talk all about vitamin D and the importance of vitamin D and the pros and the cons of it. So make sure you don't miss that recording that's on our website as well. So if you're wondering about your vitamin D and its impact to your oxalates, make sure you check that out so you can get more info on vitamin D. Now we get to do the really exciting part, which is to take a deeper look at what's coming out in the medical literature and the scientific literature about oxalates. So this is a really great study. It came out in just 2023, and it looks at the preventative pieces and the pieces that are going to be most causing risk that can be varied, the variables that we can actually affect for patients in regards to oxalate prevention. So the first thing that they're looking at here has to do with fluid intake. So they're saying, hey, if you've got a higher body mass, or if there's a lot of heat in your environment that's causing you to go through your fluids in your body faster, that's going to put you at a higher risk of having this dehydration sort of component happen happening and not having enough liquids to help you clear these oxalates through. The other piece there is cigarettes that they mention in this study. Then they also mention an entire group of dietary pieces that we can do. And so here they talk about and they compile all this little literature about increasing calcium in your diet can actually help reduce the form of these calcium oxalate stones. Reducing the amount of sodium in our diet can help reduce those oxalate stones. Reducing the amount of oral oxalates that we're taking in. So remember, that's especially those leafy green components that are high in oxalates, those plant substances high in oxalates. And then reducing vitamin C actually can as well, making sure that we're not taking excessive amounts of vitamin D as well. So it's not saying you have to be low in vitamin D, just not taking excessive amounts. And then we find that citrus fruits end up being very powerful in helping with reducing oxalates as well. And then there's specific studies that were mentioned within this study talking about lime powder. And this was lime as in the citrus fruit plant, the fruit of the lime, the green round ball. And what they were doing was juicing it and dehydrating it. And then they were standardizing it to help with the oxalates being able to be pulled out when people were including that in their diet. They also go on to mention several different both medicines and natural chemicals that impact our oxalate levels. For example, they talk about caffeine in this study, and they mention, wow, caffeine has such a varied amount of research. Some research saying it actually reduces oxalates, and some research saying that it increases oxalates. So these authors were saying, we actually just don't know. There's still more studies that need to come out in regards to that because there's so much disagreement in the medical world about that. They talk about a component EGCG and green tea as well. And they talk about several different probiotics as well. And we're going to get into some of that really cool information.
So here's a research study on these anti-nutrients in general, right? These kind of plant compounds that diminish the absorption and yield, disease in the animals and humans that eat them. So, there's a lot out there, in the media and also in the primary literature about anti-nutrients, right? You've probably come across like a lectin-free diet in your research, or like the Gundry diet, or there's all sorts of these like branded diets that diminish these anti-nutrients. And of course, there's concern in having too many of these nutrients, right? They're not helpful from the oxalate perspective, right? They contribute to stones and calcium binding. But the bigger piece here that I still want to encourage zooming out is that as you diminish the fruit and vegetable intake of, you're removing a whole lot of super beneficial micronutrients, minerals, etc., in removing those foods. And just, on the bottom here, the sort of quote that I pulled out is, the total fruit and vegetable intake remains exceedingly low in the American culture, with 10% of Americans meeting the FDA's recommended vegetable and fruit intake of 2.5 servings a day. If you've walked into one of our office rooms, you've probably heard us describe, the need for way more than this in the vegetable world to sort of meet, an anti-inflammatory protocol or an autoimmune protocol or just optimizing health, right? These vegetables and fruits, these colors of food that we're eating are the multivitamin of the natural world. So yes, there is a time and place, and removing these anti-nutrients through food preparation ends up being sort of my preferred mode of monitoring, especially of mitigating risk. especially when it comes to oxalate. It's not uncommon, however, that I'll give patients with kidney stones a low oxalate diet for, 6 weeks to 3 months, right? So it just, again, sort of has to do with the population, the patient population, what we end up recommending here. Here's a little research on magnesium. And interestingly enough, magnesium helps in the excretion and the absorption of oxalates. So if you are, you can take in oxalates from the food into the bloodstream, but again, you've got to have this process of taking it out of the bloodstream and dumping it into the kidneys for excretion. So we talked about calcium helping with that excretion, and also magnesium does this as well.
So here's this cool research on lime powder, and they called it the lime powder regimen in this study. And basically, what they were doing is they were dehydrating those limes, the lime juice, and then they were calibrating back up the amount of electrolytes needed to have some potassium, but not enough that it was causing irritation to the GI system. And so these patients that were on this, or these study participants, I should say, this is a human study. What they were doing is they were taking 5 grams of this standardized lime powder, and they found that there was virtually no side effect risk from it, which is pretty amazing. And it was reducing the amount of oxalate buildup in their system and helping them reduce oxalate stones. So pretty neat. And they were saying that these researchers were saying this looks like it's safe for daily consumption. So there's currently in a stage 3 trial for this. I know this was way back in 2014, but I followed these same researchers and looked at their 2015 article, 2017, 2019, and I haven't seen anything since then, but it looks like they are trying to get people to sign up for their class 3 human trial to look at long-term prevention of oxalate stones using this daily lime powder. And unfortunately, this lime powder, I think they're trying to probably, get it trademarked. So it's not like something that we can say, oh, take this one product. But what we can take from this is that lime as a citrus fruit included in your diet could be a helpful thing for reducing these oxalate stones.
So interesting, Dr. Molly. I love doing these doc talks because we just get to nerd out about these particular subjects, and then we end up learning a whole lot in the process, right? So here's a little research article on vitamin D and how it increases oxalate, in particular in excess. It's very, very hard to have excess vitamin D per the diet. And I commonly see excess vitamin D happening with my patients who are supplementing a whole lot for a long period of time. Remember, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so it builds up in the tissues. Vitamin D, we know, supports the bones, right? It supports calcium being put into the bones. When it's in excess, it supports stone formation, and in particular, these calcium oxalate stones. So this is why, we end up testing as part of our annual panel vitamin D levels on our patients every year, because it varies so much, and the supplementation we definitely want to make sure is not in excess in the blood. Here's another article on probiotics as supporting oxalate excretion, and the ones that they found in particular to help the kidneys excrete the oxalates were the lactobacilli and the bifidobacterium species. So there's a whole bunch of different types of probiotics out there. These are just 2 of the multiple types. They're commonly used in a multi-strain probiotic blend, but not always, right? So if oxalates are part of of your symptom picture, or you've been diagnosed with some stones or even crystals, this would be a beneficial additional piece for your microbiome.
So here's more info that we were able to find specifically on these researchers took this a step further, and they were saying, okay, for the gut microbiome, is there a difference between people who are these primary oxalate excess urinators or people who have this happening because they're eating, they're having, it's more in their intestinal system. So they're called the enteric hyperoxaluria patients. And so they basically took these subjects and these humans, and they broke them into two different groups and said, okay, we are going to see what your fecal oxalate digesting bacteria looks like for these two different groups. And what they found is that they had the oxidative degrading potential was actually very similar in both these healthy patients and these patients that had this genetic predisposition towards this. But what they found is that the people with this genetic predisposition for it have what they called the most interactive bacterial network. And they were saying that people with that are just eating too much essentially of these oxalates have often will have this decrease of abundance or not have enough of these major oxalate degraders. And they were saying there's all kinds of conditions that can push the microbiota to do this. So it might have to do with what the hosts are eating, so what these humans are eating, and how, other lifestyle conditions. And so they're saying, hey, to help people prevent too much oxalate coming out in their urine and causing these stones, we might be able to have impact on their microbiome and see a change in how the stones are degraded from the gut intestinal system on. Since most people are having too much oxalates because of what they're ingesting rather than a genetic condition that makes it so they don't break them down.
So interesting here is a study on astragalus. We always try to find something about the herbal medicine because it's such a big part of our naturopathic practice. But here's an excellent animal study on astragalus that describes how astragalus extract can decrease the crystallization of calcium oxalate stones and ultimately improve the lifespan of these. This is like a fly species that were stone formers. So kind of cool to see the herbs play out. Part of these herbs, this is a traditional Chinese and Ayurvedic herb. There's just thousands of years of like clinical experience of these like Eastern herbs, but it's just like the Western materia medica is just catching up with like, okay, understanding these herbs more. And it's just one of these examples here.
Here we see a study that talks about the green tea extract. So talk about, once again, we think about these Eastern herbs and how they impact. And this one was interesting because green tea itself is actually, remember, it's a tea, so it's higher in oxalates. But what they were finding is this specific antioxidant that's one of the most powerful antioxidants in green tea. One of the reasons why green tea is touted to be so helpful for us humans is this EGCG. And what they're finding is it actually helps bind those calcium oxalate crystals and helps with the tubular clearing. And this was an animal study, but they were saying that it should be able to be applicable to humans. And so they're saying that this green tea is actually not only protective because it can remove those oxalates, but it actually can, as an antioxidant, be protective for those little tubules in the kidney system. So it can help prevent the stone and support keeping those microtubule networks healthy, which is just so powerful.
So, once this is the sort of part in the doc talk where we've kind of wrapped up the primary literature, and then we sort of offer to you just some ideas of like some products that are out there that kind of match the literature in terms of supporting, yeah, the oxalates. So here at Prosper, we have a physician grade apothecary in our building here attached to our clinic, where we dispense, a series of supplements and nutraceuticals that have been quality controlled and vouched for the strength of them. We also have an online store that is much bigger, with more products available that are also kind of physician grade. There's a whole big dilemma out there on supplement adulteration, which is why we end up recommending, trying to come to the storefront or use our online stores, or at least know that you're buying from the supplier themselves rather than a big online warehouse.
So we're going to just highlight a few of our common go-tos whenever we're working with patients that are really up against having a lot of oxalates, either that they are trying to biotransform out, or if they're actually producing kidney stones and not just having excess oxalates in their urine that's been found. So one of the most research that we kind of touched on was that magnesium citrate. For some people, they cannot tolerate this because of their bowels and will use instead potassium citrate. Sometimes with that, we also have to be thinking about how it's going to impact bowels, although generally remember that citrate reduces that amount of oxalate that we have staying in the urinary system. So it really helps transport it out. So if we have patients who are having high oxalate foods or enjoying their leafy veggies, as we often will want them to do, oftentimes we're thinking about pairing those. Additionally, we talked about astragalus today and how it has this beautiful effect. It's also used as a very strong, potent antioxidant from the Chinese medicine and Eastern Indian Ayurvedic medical perspective. We also use it as an immunomodulator, so it can be powerful there. We talked about the antioxidant found in green tea, the EGCG, and how that can be really helpful. And so sometimes that's something that we're reaching for. And then we've included two others just to mention today. One is a herbal formulation that's actually a tincture called Stonebreaker, and this is one that we only really use under medical supervision, but is one that we could use in combination with other products to help with dissolutions of stones if we find it safe to do. And we're always looking at imaging and working with the patient and talking to them about what to expect with that kind of thing. Then the other is Kidney Correct, and this is one that's made by Designs for Health that's more of a kidney specific healing antioxidant system that's a collection of herbs and nutraceuticals that are known to help reduce kidney stress and reduce kidney damage when there's already inflammation going on within the kidneys. So it's something that we'll reach for when we're concerned about quite a bit of damage going on for patients if there's been excess oxalates for a period of time, especially. Dr. Rosalie, do you have anything else to contribute to this list that we have here? Anything else you wanted to say about these?
Yeah, just thinking again about those probiotics, especially the bifidolactose species, just checking that your multiprobiotic has those particular species in there.
Yes.
Not all of them do.
And our favorite probiotic for that is the HLC Intensive that we have quite a bit of here at Prosper. And that is either that Pharmex or Soroil Genestra brand that we have through Full Scripts available as well on our website. So those are both human specific, which means that they are exactly what they're supposed to be for us humans as Lactobacillus and Bifida probiotics. So yeah, didn't mention that. So thanks for reminding me.
Next doc talk here is, it's already the month of May, and we've gotten a lot of questions in clinic about glucose management. Not just weight management, but not just prediabetes, but in general, like how do we manage glucose from a natural perspective? There's a whole lot out there that's brand new, especially this year or within the last few months, on continuous glucose monitoring systems and some herbal research. So we're excited to offer you this next month. So we do these doc talks on the second Thursday of each month. May 8th is our next upcoming one.
So join us for that. We'll release it online on the 8th of May. And like Dr. Rosalie said, we'll be talking about the continuous glucose monitors and more. It should be a really good one. So we're happy to work with you as an individual. If you are concerned at all about kidney stones or your kidney health or oxalates, or how do you balance this diet and how strict you have to be with your oxalate intake, and how do you really track whether or not you're making progress with that? If you are starting natural products to support, we want to make sure we're not doing damage to our kidneys, are one of the most important eliminatory organs that we have in the body. So reach out to us, check us out on our website and request an appointment there, or give us a call and get on the books, and we're happy to work with you. We're looking forward to it.